I want to bring up Casey Quinlan next. Casey is another great researcher, longtime history teacher. We love history teachers. Also a championship baseball coach, right, Casey?
That's right.
And Casey's got a lot of informative stuff to talk about. So if you give him a hand, Casey Quinlan.
All right, first of all, I want to thank Olney and also David Denton for bringing this conference here. We've been absent from any conference for probably the last 3 to 4 years because of COVID, and we've kind of missed the camaraderie as researchers, but also in presenting material that is new and informative on the murder of John F. Kennedy. And I know over the years as a teacher, you know, you kind of sit back and you wonder, what is new in the Kennedy assassination? Good God, it's 59 years old. We're going into the 59th year. And you would think that we live in a country which is known as the greatest democracy on earth, that we would have access to this material, but it is locked in the National Archives. Now, it's not going to get out unless we have active members, such as the researchers here, who will petition the United States government to unlock and unload some of these documents. And little by little, as it was brought out in several of these with Professor Denton, that these documents are little by little coming out. Now, when the documents do come out, as was just said by our professor in South Carolina, the idea that there's over 4 million of these documents. They're now in release. They're out there to be looked at. And we have a lot of these researchers who have been looking at those documents and are going to try to present some of that material to you. Professor Hyman mentioned the idea about reading. For those of you who didn't like to read, I just want to comment on that when I was in middle school, and it wasn't called middle school at the time, it was grade school, I did not like to read. By the time I got to high school, I know I didn't like to read. But then something turned me on, and it was the Kennedy assassination. So I'm here to share some of my readings with you and the documentation that goes along with this, because these are some of the new books that are out, and they are hard to read. They are hard to understand and comprehend, but they do tell some fantastic stories. And I'm going to show you a couple of these books. One of the first ones is called the Skorzeny Papers, all right, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And I know Brian Edwards, one of my colleagues, basically says, what are all these things in here? I said, those are all the main points. And then one of our close associates, I call him Dr. Shaw, he says, my God, he says, why don't you just mark the whole book? Well, that's how important these books are, okay? So that's the Skorzeny Papers, and we'll cover some of that. The book I just finished is this one. It's called Coup in Dallas. This is about a 650-page book, and the problem with this is that I read it. There's a lot of people that don't read books. I'm old-fashioned. I'm old school. I have to have a book in my hand. And when I mark something down, I mark that down because it's important, because I didn't want to mark inside the books. Well, not only did I mark it down, I marked inside the books too. And I have double and triple of this information. Now, there is no way possible today that I can give you all the information that's in here. So I'm going to highlight some of that information so that as we go through this, you'll understand a little bit more about how important this book is. We have another author here, Larry Rivera, and this is Larry Rivera's book, The Horseman, and it is an excellent book. This gentleman's going to speak later on, and you need to pay attention to what he's talking about, because he is talking about technology and the use of technology and the use of that technology as applied to the films and the pictures that are out there for the last 59 years. And then these two books, which I'm just starting to read, by Walter Herbst. It says it did not start with JFK. And Craig Bozarth brought both of these books today to me to read, and I've been doing some research on this. And as far as I know, these books are in answer to these books that are here. Give you kind of an idea. I've never really been a country western fan, but I turned into one here recently because I listen to a lot of country western music and listening to outlaw country, which I really like. It kind of gives me an opportunity to understand some of the lyrics and where these guys are coming from. So I came across this gentleman right here, and some of you know who he is, Waylon Jennings. Waylon Jennings says, "I've always been crazy, but it's kept me from going insane." And I think that's probably what a lot of researchers are looking at right now after 59 years of going through this material. You know, it amazes me after I grew into this is the idea that I am reading more than I ever have in my entire life, and I do not have enough time to do it. So let's begin and let's see where we can go with this. All right. All right, an invisible government, the deep state, has existed since the 1930s that strongly influenced, if not entirely controlled, foreign policy from one administration to the next. In the 1950s, Republican President Dwight Eisenhower called it the military-industrial complex. Around the same time, Democratic Senator Hubert Humphrey agreed, "We have transferred to some of these industrial giants, oil included, great power and influence, and the continuation of a concentration of economic power and the loss of the government's decision-making power over aspects of our defensive policy." The deep state. Good Lord, we've been hearing about this for probably the last 5, 6, 7, 10 years. The deep state, Oxford Dictionary, a body of people, typically influenced members of the government agencies or the military, believed to be involved in a secret manipulation or control of government policy. That is the Oxford Dictionary definition. Professor Peter Dale Scott says, and he wrote about the deep state in a sense that the military and defense contractors had driven the United States of America repeatedly into wars and maybe helped fuel 9/11 and the wars that followed. For Scott, it also applied to large financial interests like Wall Street lawyers and bankers. We could say that, in the most generous sense possible, the term deep state is a way for both sides to describe parts of the government or forces that interact with government that aren't elected or are beyond the conventional checks and balances of our system. The deep state, misplaced power directed by those who wanted to control America's destiny, and to fulfill this destiny, everyone was expendable. President Truman and President Eisenhower would have to deal with the deep state government. Still, it was not until JFK became president that the opposition began to get serious, for he was opposed to what the deep state wanted to do on many levels. He signed a nuclear test ban treaty with the Soviets by bypassing Congress and going to the American people directly. He signed a deal to sell wheat to Russia and which enabled them to feed their people and delay the time when the Soviet military would self-destruct. He publicly spoke of coexistence with the Soviets, an unspeakable misstep. He began a pullout of troops in Vietnam and intended to institute a complete withdrawal after he was reelected. He passed up the opportunity to invade Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and even though this is what the hardliners in America and in Congress around him advised him that he should do. He allowed the Soviets to remove missiles from Cuba after the missile crisis without verification, and agreed to remove U.S. missiles from Turkey, and decided to never invade Cuba. He initiated talks to normalize relations with Castro's Cuba, even though he knew that appeasement of communists could not be tolerated. He refused to provide air support during the Bay of Pigs invasion and doomed most of the Cuban exiles to a certain death. Now, I'm going to correct that right now. New information, new documentation is out, and Kennedy did support the air support for the Cuban invasion. He supported it. He gave it to Richard Bissell, and he gave it to General Charles Cabell. They dropped the ball, and we're trying to figure out why they dropped the ball. They never told any of their cadre who were going to invade Cuba and be on the beaches as this entire thing becomes a fiasco. The people in Cuba, the men who were on the beaches, hated John F. Kennedy. They said it was ridiculous what he did. He did support them. That is being brought out in the archives, in the documents, 59 years later. Good God, we may not have had an assassination. He called on the National Guard to ensure that African American students were allowed to attend the University of Mississippi and the University of Alabama, and to host other actions that the deep state found unacceptable. This is why a Kennedy presidency could no longer be allowed to continue. The proponents of a new world order wanted to achieve American superiority, preserve the American way of life, advance white nationalism, contain communism, and maintain a segregated society at any cost. Anything was acceptable and everyone was expendable. In this endeavor, even the American president who disagreed with the deep state, with their vision for their future, he was expendable. Now, this is what's coming out of these books. These are some of the new books that are being produced right now. All right, this project is sponsored by Project JFK CSI Dallas and the JFK Historical Group, and it is called the LANCELOT Project. It is the blueprint for the murder of President John F. Kennedy. That is me, and I'm a member of Project JFK CSI Dallas. In our Cold War history, the unspeakable was the void in our government's covert action doctrine of plausible deniability, sanctioned by the June 18, 1948 National Security Council Directive, National Security Council 10/2. Under the direction of Allen Dulles, the CIA interpreted plausible deniability as a green light to assassinate national leaders, overthrow governments, and lie to cover it up any trace of accountability. All for the sake of promoting U.S. interests and maintaining our nuclear-backed dominance over the Soviet Union and other nations. According to the perceptions of the United States military and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, their covert strong-arm agency, the CIA, along with a handful of Wall Street lawyers, international bankers, and multinational military hardware corporations, they believe that President Kennedy is dismantling the entire United States national security system. His policies will collapse the Federal Reserve System and give the United States economic and banking power back to the United States Treasury Department. The national debt in 1963 was $62 billion. a far cry from the $30 trillion in 2022. Kennedy's policies would have ended the Cold War and eliminated the national debt of $62 billion. If that were possible today, I'm sure that gas would probably be about $1.50 a gallon. But then, you know, those companies told us that we don't have price gouging. The program you're about to see contains the strongest evidence ever published of a high-level conspiracy by the Military-Industrial Banking Intelligence Alliance and its ultra-right-wing allies to assassinate President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963. As an author who spent years researching and writing these 3 books on the subject, I state that unequivocally, and that was Dick Russell. The removal of President John F. Kennedy. The object of the LANCELOT project was the removal of President John F. Kennedy from the political scene permanently and in spectacular fashion. Paramount to the success of the operation was a guarantee that those behind the plot would never be brought to bear. The greatest threat to that anonymity was the potential arrest and subsequent identification of the assassin or assassins. So aside from the requisite technical skills, the criteria for their selection had been a history of entrenched service to those within the hierarchy of the conspiracy, assassins they could trust. At the core of that trust was a record of intense loyalty and a shared ideology that the conspirators could rely on. These were not merely hired guns. In exchange, of course, the shooters were guaranteed significant compensation. But more critical was the assurance that as soon as Kennedy was annihilated, they would be spirited out of Dallas and into visual and virtual oblivion. The insertion of Lee Harvey Oswald. To that end, the strategists of the LANCELOT project devised a set of foolproof deflections during the first 48 hours following the shooting of President Kennedy while the killers fled. Drawing from a handbook of magic tricks, the insertion of a patsy, a pigeon, into the drama, one who would be arrested within hours of the crime while the murderers left Texas, while the diversion of choice, enter Lee Harvey Oswald. And in the book, Coup in Dallas, one of the co-authors, Alan Kent, says this: one of the takeaways of note from Coup is that on the ground, the players, including likely shooters, were not the Cubans that researchers have spent a great deal of time chasing around, but crazy, extremely right-wing Texas white men, such as Cannon and Askins, who had long ago entered the domain of General Willoughby. And we'll cover a little bit of that. President Eisenhower's farewell address, January 17, 1961. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all of the United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, and even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. Now let me enter something here. I grew up in the 1950s and the 1960s. I grew up and went to Catholic school for about 12 years. And one of the co-authors asked me a question. They said, well, what did you get out of your religion classes in the 50s and 60s? And I jokingly said, but I meant it when I say this, I said, kill a commie for Christ. And she says, that's what was coming from the pulpits. Anti-communism, big time. If you lived back in those times, I guarantee you, you'd see somebody's backyard being dug up and they'd put a bomb shelter in there. We saw that all over our area. Because the Russians in 1957 put up Sputnik. Scared the hell out of everybody. Okay? And I remember sitting out there watching it pass over every 17 minutes. I think what's going on here with Eisenhower, he's given us a warning. And that warning is what's going to take place 2 to 3 years after he is gone from this office. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influences, whether sought or unsought by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together. Well, you know, those words are pretty phenomenal, but at the same time, I think he's warning us that, you know, if these things are on a collision course, and you get a president that wants to go against what all of this is that they're putting out there with the military, hardware, industry, something's going to take place. The military-industrial complex is a network of individuals and institutions involved in the production of weapons and military technologies. The military-industrial complex is in our country is typically an attempt to marshal power and support continued and the increased military spending for our national government. The term military-industrial complex can also refer to the physical location of military production. Military spending creates spatial concentration on prime contractors, subcontractors, consultants, universities, skilled workers, and government installations, all of which are devoted to research and development on the manufacture of military systems and techniques. So we're going to introduce you to the Military Industrial Banking Intelligence Alliance. Dallas and Fort Worth. Now, taking that these are a little bit more modern pictures, but I put these in there to show you what Dallas and Fort Worth look like. After I read the first time the book Coup in Dallas, I wrote Amazon and kind of gave a picture, an idea of what I saw here, and I wrote this November 30th, 2021, and I put this in here. I said, in 1963, the state of Texas and the cities of Dallas and Fort Worth played an instrumental role in fulfilling their lucrative commitments with the United States military and Central Intelligence Agency. These affiliations were extremely considerable and resulted in preparing and executing the murder of President Kennedy and its cover-up. Dallas and Fort Worth and the entire state of Texas were sitting on a gold mine, and we're impatiently waiting for the United States government to declare war on something so that Texas and their cities could cash in on their colossal investments in military and industrial hardware in preparation for another United States foreign military intervention. Texas couldn't live without the military-industrial banking intelligence alliance, and neither would President Kennedy. If you've listened to the 2 or 3 speakers that were up here before me, this is what they're hinting at. We're not hinting anymore. We're telling you, this is exactly where the murder of JFK comes from. Eisenhower told you when he was getting out of office, beware of this complex. I can't really tell you what it is, but it deals with the military hardware. It's all over the place. And where is it? It's situated in Dallas and Fort Worth. This is what the military-industrial banking intelligence alliance looks like. Now, a quote inside the book, Coup in Dallas, by Charles Robert Drago says, anyone with reasonable access to this case's legitimate evidence who does not conclude that JFK was killed by criminal conspirators is cognitively impaired and or complicit in the crime. So I don't know. I'm sure about 35% of America still believes in the single bullet theory, but then again, hey, they just follow Dan Rather. Okay, here we go. Facts matter along with complicated truths. Welcome to the fascinating world of research into the 59-year-old murder of President John F. Kennedy. Finding hidden pieces of the puzzle. The murder of JFK, 59 years and counting. I mean, by God, we've been told that we're the greatest country on earth, we're the greatest democracy on earth. And let me just pause a little bit. My wife has barred me from watching the news, any news, primarily because I come home and I quote, almost every day. I sit back and I go, the greatest democracy on earth, and we're going to let this crap take place. Russia invading a country and destroying not only the country and the physical nature of this country, but its people. And I'm sitting there going, but we pride ourselves. God bless America. We are the greatest democracy on earth. Well, what the hell are we doing? I'll just stop there. Now, can you see why I get banned from watching TV? You're not watching any more news. And it really doesn't matter what news it is, right? All right, Coup in Dallas, the book. The narrative by H.P. Albarelli Jr., Hank Albarelli, co-authored with Leslie Sharp and Alan Kent, is based upon a 1963 date book or desk diary kept by a mysterious deep-cover intelligence operative named Jean-Pierre Lafitte. When I first read that name, I'm sitting there going, the pirate? I go, ooh, the pirate, Jean-Pierre. Of course, when you're dealing with CIA, FBI, military intelligence, and I mean, how many different pseudonyms and fake names and, well, and you talk about fake news and stuff like that. Good God, people, if you read anything into the Kennedy assassination, you'll find that there are so many fake names. But anyway, this guy is Jean-Pierre Lafitte. Albarelli had written about Lafitte in connection with to the CIA in his 2009 book, A Terrible Mistake. This is a pretty close, reasonable facsimile of the diary or the desktop diary that was found, and Albarelli had an opportunity to look at it and study it.
I found 25 names for Jean-Pierre.
Gary Shaw just informed us that there were at least 25 pseudonyms or names that he used. And he was part of the FBI, part of the CIA, part of the FBI, CIA, military intelligence, and also the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. And I know when we were trying to figure out, what some of the speakers were saying, okay, where does it begin? Where does it end? Which one is which? Which is military? Which is CIA? Which is FBI? And which is Secret Service? And which is which? Okay? You know, you talk about doing research on this. My God, you talk about getting distorted, trying to figure out who's who. Albarelli wrote this book about the murder of Frank Olson, a CIA personnel that supposedly committed suicide by falling out of a 10-story building. But what he found out that the people who were inside that 10th floor, the two people that were up there at the time was Jean-Pierre Lafitte and a Corsican mafia guy that he was working directly with. And so, I don't know, you can put two and two together. I think they threw him out of the window. Of course, I don't know how much that would stand up in a court of law today. The program will expose the research and writings of these investigative journalists, Hank Albarelli and also Ralph Gaines, Coup in Dallas, and the Scorzeni papers. Otto Scorzeni. The actual Scorzeni papers are the personal correspondence and business records of Otto Scorzeni, the former head of Hitler's special forces. These papers were purchased in 2012 by Major Ralph Gaines through a public auction. The original intent in procuring the papers was to write a history of Scorzeni's past, World War II life, and the great mystery which was a great mystery to historians. It will also include significant historical evidence from John Newman, Gary Shaw, Dick Russell, Bill Kelly, Larry Hancock, and Bill Simpich. It will feature specific historical evidence from Dick Russell, the man who knew too much, JFK in Vietnam, John Newman, State Secret by Bill Simpich, J. Gary Shaw, Cover Up, Larry Hancock, Tipping Point, and then Bill Kelly gets into all different types of military intelligence, especially the Axie papers and the information that he brings out. J. Gary Shaw, who you're going to hear from later on, J. Gary Shaw, a first-generation researcher, and is considered an authority on the JFK assassination. A retired architect from Cleburne, Texas, Shaw began studying the case the day after it happened. Shaw met Penn Jones Jr. of Midlothian, Texas, after reading Forgive My Grief, and I think there was four books on that. And Penn sold Gary 2 complete sets of 26 volumes, and Gary was hooked. Now, Gary Shaw is here with us today, and I'm not going to read too much more about, but Gary's going to present some new information, which is really old information, but it will be new to you guys and new to a lot of the researchers because, well, I'm going to let Gary tell you about that, but that information is very, very important to the murder of JFK and the murder and surrounding elements and eyewitnesses whom Gary is going to bring out. Jean-Pierre Lafitte's date book is the primary source for this operation that we're putting together here. Inside the cover of Lafitte's date book are 2 coins, one with Hitler's profile and the other with a Nazi symbol representing the Third Reich, and the last item is a stamp of Adolf Hitler. The LANCELOT project was named by, we believe, Jean-Pierre Lafitte, but if you go a little bit further, you'll find out that there are other contributing factors into naming this murder a code name called the LANCELOT Project. And I know for years we were trying to come up with all different types of names. Well, somebody had to have a code name. Well, that's the name they bring out in this book, the LANCELOT Project. Inside this book, there are letters, O, O-S, J, A, and T. There are a whole bunch more things in there. But to bring out a couple of those, the O stands for Otto Scorzeni. O-S, Oswald. J-A, James Angleton. T, the authors and co-authors believe that T is Tracy Barnes. And I'll show you who those people are. Albarelli was in the process of going to interview Pierre Lafitte, and he goes by Pierre Lafitte, when Pierre died. So he never got a chance to interview him, but went and talked to his widow, his wife, Renee Lafitte. And from that point on, Albarelli knew that there was some information that Lafitte was going to give him, but he had to work it with his wife to try to figure out if she was going to give him access to this particular book. And so after about 2 or 3 weeks, she opened up and she says, I'll let you see what is in this book, and you can do some research on it and kind of go from there. But she says, I'm only going to give you the year 1963. And in that book, if you follow it, and I know these authors and co-authors are trying to get this book authenticated, and I think it's pretty close to being authenticated right now as to the years, the dates, and so on and so forth. But as we open this thing up, it fits like a glove. So Albarelli worked directly with Renee Lafitte. Albarelli's book also adds corroboration to my own work as an investigative journalist, and this is Dick Russell speaking, including knowledge imparted to me by the double agent Richard Case Nagel. While Nagel is not named in the date book, it provides substantiation for his stressing Mexico City Hotel Luma as a planning site and offers up the name of Willoughby, Major General Charles Willoughby, Associate Jack Cannon, and Cannon was under Willoughby, stationed in Asia, and at the same time, Cannon was considered a military personnel that would take care of what we call wet works or black job operations, or a hitman. Okay. Who Nagel hinted was among several shooters in Dealey Plaza. An excerpt from the book itself, Askins, Willoughby, OK, Lafitte date book, and it gives you the dates. Cannon, SV, and we're still breaking some of these things down. An introduction to American intelligence directors at the end of World War II. Introduction to the British intelligence directors at the end of World War II, and the Nazi directors at the end of World War II. William Donovan, United States Army General in charge of the OSS during World War II and at the end of World War II. Office of Strategic Service. Allen Dulles, second in command of the OSS. Now, this is wartime intelligence. Okay? British intelligence, William Stevenson, command of the Special Operations Executive, MI6. Any of you read James Bond? James Bond supposedly comes from MI6. MI5, MI6 is foreign intelligence, and MI5 is home intelligence, very much like the FBI. Charles Hambro, commander, SOE, MI6, British intelligence. Reinhard Gehlen, three-star general in charge of the Nazi Abwehr, foreign intelligence. And of course, Otto Skorzeny, colonel, Hitler's #1 commando, Nazi Abwehr, SS, foreign intelligence. Why bring these out? Because by the time we end World War II, we will take the British, American, and German specialists in the areas of intelligence. By 1943 through 1945, we will combine all three of these. We'll combine the British, Americans, and the Germans, the Abwehr. By 1945, all three of these wartime spy agencies would merge into one agency and then split into over 100 legal front companies. And we'll show you why that happened and who did it. How and why would this merger take place? Donovan, who was a lawyer, okay, international lawyer, was just learning how the OSS was working in the 2 or 3 years that he was in charge of this. Now, a lot of the regular Army personnel did not like what was going on because they had their own intelligence services. But Donovan saw the opportunity, and he knew the war was going to be over, and so he decided, I've got to form something to take and place inside another organization the same capacity of what we did with the OSS during World War II. So he is going to create an organization or a company called the World Commerce Corporation, a corporation. And that corporation became the OSS. Because he knew that Truman was going to X out the OSS. William Stevenson knew that he was going to lose access to the same thing, the British SOE and also MI6, but some of it would be modified and then turned around. So he helped create, along with Donovan, the British American Canadian Corporation, which is a corporation that incorporated into its bylaws British intelligence, SOE, and MI6. Why? They had legal power, they had legal control, and legal money. What money? Well, General Patton stumbled across a tremendous amount of gold bullion, and that gold bullion was just sitting in these caves. And so under Eisenhower, who was the head of the Supreme Headquarters Allied Command personnel, he's trying to figure out, what do we do with this? Okay? So, here's what happens. Okay? The Nazi gold, and depending on what books you're going to read to get information from, we estimated that it's probably about $9 trillion in Nazi gold. And that's 1945 money, 1944, 1945 money. It's not today's money. It's $9 trillion, gold bullion. What are we going to do with it? Well, maybe you should ask, where did it come from? Do you think the Nazis stole it from every country they went into? Yeah, they did. Melted it down and made these gold bars and put Black Eagle Trust on it. All right? You know, maybe as a great democratic process, maybe we should give some of this back to the people, or maybe all of it back to the people that the Nazis stole from. So what happened to it? Well, the World Commerce Corporation comes right in through the front door of the Supreme Headquarters Allied Command personnel of Europe. Eisenhower was in command. Marched in and legally took control of the gold and said, we will take it, put it in our corporation, and go from there. Okay? So now, the government and the military can now fall back and say, well, this corporation came in, and sitting on the board of directors are all these spies in charge of these agencies who were international bankers and international lawyers. It was confiscated by the World Commerce Corporation. The World Commerce Corporation, or the WCC, was incorporated in Panama on August 13th, 1945. Directors, William Donovan, Allen Dulles, William Stevenson, and Charles Hambro, all legal international lawyers and international bankers. They now have access to the gold, legally, signed over by Eisenhower. General William Donovan knew that the Office of Strategic Service was about to be terminated, so that's why he created the World Commerce Corporation. Now, the World Commerce Corporation is going to have at least 100 different entities or companies that are attached to the World Commerce Corporation. Now, these are front companies, but they're still legal. To give you kind of an idea, the infrastructure for legally confiscating the Nazi gold, and later on, the vehicle to execute political assassinations. Okay? Donovan through the OSS and Dulles, through Hambro, and then another gentleman brought in, and you've heard the name before, John J. McCloy, because he's a New York banker, and he works directly with Donovan and Dulles. And then Stevens comes in with the British intelligence. It went through the World Commerce Corporation, and then later on NATO will approve it, okay? And in some cases, the MAG program, not Make America Great Again, this is the military assistance. It was the government's plan of bringing in early people to countries to protect, defend, and teach the people there about military. All right. Now, that same organization, the World Commerce Corporation, who will confiscate the gold, which is about $9 trillion, along with the British, American, and Canadian corporation, they have to try to figure out what they're going to do with this gold and with this money. Well, this is what they do. They create a situation where they're going to need a guy by the name of Otto Skorzeny. And they're going to use Otto Skorzeny and his wife as CIA, well, actually OSS. Well, actually, boy, it gets pretty shaky when you try to discuss this in a high school classroom setting and situation. And I did about 50 years ago. 45 years ago, I started discussing this, and good Lord, I got so many comments. They said, "Where are you getting your information?" I said, "Well, obviously, it's not in our American history book." "Well, where did you get it?" "Well, it can't be true. We never worked with the Nazis." Well, what is being brought out in the documentation, what is being brought out in these books, and what we have known, a few of us have known this for years, that the World Commerce Corporation got a hold of this money, this gold, and we're going to finance something called assassinations. And we're going to put somebody in charge of those assassinations. And the people that are going to be in charge of these assassinations are going to be Otto Skorzeny and his wife Elsie. And we'll show you where that comes from. Okay. In ending the war in Europe, this is what took place. We established a program, and you can look this up in your history books, called Project Paperclip. Okay? This is the face of American intelligence during World War II in 1942. Core individuals who played major role in ending the reign of Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich. You've got director of the OSS, William Donovan. You've got Lyman Lemnitzer, who's also CIA, who's also, I should say, OSS. And Alan Dulles, commander, OSS. Okay? You've got, let's see if I got him up there. Yeah. Richard Helms, OSS. C.D. Jackson, who was mentioned before with Life magazine, OSS. Okay, you should have, okay, yeah. You got William Quinn, and Quinn, he will become the brand new director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Then you got James Angleton, station chief in Italy, OSS. And then you have a guy by the name of Tracy Barnes, a lieutenant with Dulles and the OSS. Barnes was brought in because he was part of the Jedburgh operation operating out of Great Britain. So he knew how to handle some of the Jedburghs who would become the people that he would have to train to infiltrate all of Europe. Well, the war in Europe is over. So what are these guys going to do? Well, the war may be over, but Europe is devastated. All right, so this is what's going to take place. Project Paperclip. Project Paperclip, a successful joint American intelligence operation through the Pentagon, military intelligence, the OSS, British MI6, and German intelligence, the Abwehr. It brought to the U.S. literally thousands of top aerospace and munitions experts from Nazi Germany and Nazi Abwehr spies to form the United States corporation leadership and the expertise behind technological and military advances of our growing military-industrial complex for our future. So never before, when you look at the very beginning of Oliver Stone's film JFK, never before have we had this. It would be brought right straight into America and posed that we got to have this because we got to protect ourselves from those damn Nazis. Oh, wait a minute. We defeated them and then brought them into our country secretively because we found out later on they killed a lot of Jews. And we can't tell the people that we brought these people in. So the new enemy becomes the Soviet Union, Russia. So we're going to turn everything by 1944 and 45 against the Soviet Union. And you should know that we allied with the Soviet Union to defeat Nazi Germany. The Dulles transaction, a secret agreement between the American OSS and Nazi Abwehr. Well, the secret agreement was between Allen Dulles and his buddy at the time in 1943 in Bern, Switzerland, Reinhard Gehlen, who was the SS general, Abwehr, head of the Abwehr. And how could these guys even meet? Well, they were students together. They were students together.
Casey, 5 minutes.
Thank you. At Oxford University. So they knew each other. In fact, Dulles took Gehlen back to do some work with his organization, which he's a lawyer, and he's going to use Gehlen prior to the war, and then Gehlen goes back to Germany and becomes the head of German intelligence, the Abwehr. So this deal that is going to be made in 1943 is a secret deal, and I think how one of the books explains is that Dulles sat down with Gehlen and says, well, I assume you already know that the war is going to be over and you're going to lose. And supposedly that the answer that he got back was, yes, we know we're going to lose. So what do you want from us? Well, first of all, we would like Rockefeller would like the $250 million that he lent to Adolf Hitler in Germany to help bring in the Third Reich. Oh, is that it's not in your American history books? Hell, most of this stuff is not in your American history books. But I guarantee you, you're going to find a lot in the archives when they start letting these documentations out. Or if you want to read about this, okay? Okay. Both Allen Dulles and Reinhard Gehlen came from affluent families. These families sent their sons to the best school that money could buy, Oxford University, and that's where they became friends. Okay? And then Reinhard Gehlen will do his apprenticeship with Allen Dulles' law firm, and in that law firm was John J. McCloy. Who is Sullivan and Cromwell? That's the lawyers that Dulles and his brother work for. They own and control that. IG Farben, the chemical manufacturer of Zyklon B, the poison gas used in the Nazi death camps, and its associated companies were among the Nazi-era corporations that did business with Sullivan and Cromwell. Their chief contact in the firm was attorney by the name of John Foster Dulles, who became Secretary of State in the Eisenhower administration. Sullivan and Cromwell thrived on its cartels of collusion with the new Nazi regime, say the firm's chroniclers. In 1933 and 1934, when the Nazis' brutal course was obvious, Dulles let out, this is John Foster Dulles, let out with his cables to the German clients with the salutation, Heil Hitler. In 1935, he scribbled a screed for the Atlantic Monthly magazine dismissing Nazi state terrorism as changes we recognize to be inevitable. Okay, this is 1934, 1935, and let me close a couple things here. These international lawyers and bankers helped broker $250 million to Adolf Hitler, to help the Third Reich. And once they knew that Germany was going to go under, well, the Rockefeller Bank, Chase, which became Chase Manhattan Bank, wanted their investment back. Because if somebody else got that investment, and who else might get that investment? The Russians. They're coming in from the other side. So I'm going to end right there.